Listo, creo que pasaron los 30 segundos. Así que, bueno, muy buenos días a todos.
Good day to everyone. Good afternoon for those of who are joining us, and good night for those of who are joining us from other parts of the world. We have experts with us today that have joined us and will share their vast knowledge and know-how. I would like to welcome you to our first series of webinars, considerations for African swine fever for 2022. This is our first series of webinars that we will be holding throughout this year. My name is Erika Calderon. I work at the IICA, Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. And I will now introduce the panelists who will be participating in this session. We have Ana Marisa Cordero. She is our agri-food expert at IICA headquarters. So please, you have the opening remarks. Go ahead. Thank you, Erika. Hello to everyone. I hope that you are all well. Thank you very much to all of the participants who have joined us today because of your interest in taking part in this seminar, and very special thanks and appreciation to our panelists and speakers today for their commitment in joining us today and help us make this process a process through which we can share knowledge, know-how, learn from past experiences, lessons learned. As for the implementation of compensation processes, but above all, try to hold a conversation through which we may share, learn from each other, and then assess how from that we can improve our strategies locally, regionally, and jointly fight against African swine fever. Special thanks to our partners and agencies who have been collaborating for the organization and hosting of these webinars. This is a joint effort, a partnership for cooperation through which we will become stronger, have more resources, optimize actions, and learn from each other. Thank you so much. I wish you the best. Thank you to our panelists, Erika and the IICA team for this effort. Also, as mentioned before, this is the first of a series of webinars that we will be hosting during the coming months through 2022. So I urge you to accompany us and join us in future sessions. Thank you so much, Ana Marisa. Now we have some opening remarks by Katia Martinez. She is the sub-regional representative of the AAO for Central America. Go ahead, Katia. Hello, good day to everyone. Good night and good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on compensation policies for African swine fever. We will have several international experts that will be sharing their knowledge on compensation policies for farmers as a result of the outbreaks of African swine fever in their countries. This is a joint effort with the commitment of producers and governments to coordinately work, achieve agreements to alleviate the impacts of such a devastating disease as ASF. Control of the disease, the African swine fever, which is what we are dealing with right now, must consider all compensation aspects with the goal of increasing suspicious case notification. So we have to have a very sound legal basis that strengthens the health system and a communication strategy to make the adequate messages get to the specific audiences. We have several challenges in the implementation of compensation policies, and all of these lead to agreements and commitments that must be achieved in order to be successful. This goes hand in hand with other components of the African swine fever eradication mechanisms as procedures for the elimination of offal and waste, to mention some of them. As for a regional strategy for the prevention and contention of African swine fever in the Americas, we consider that vet services and producer services must establish the actions to be followed in relation to this topic and strengthen other activities to avoid the introduction of African swine fever in their territories or countries. Therefore, we thank the participation in this webinar of our experts that will share their experience and knowledge on compensation in Spain, South Africa, Asia, and Dominican Republic. We hope that you have a lot of questions and comments so that we can share information. Welcome to this webinar. This is an event within the framework of the prevention and control of African swine fever in the Americas as part of a global initiative for the progressive control of transborder disease in animals. We thank you all international organizations, as Ana Marisa already mentioned, that are part of the G-staff and have, together with IICA, managed to coordinate all of these activities. This is our not main axis, but it won't be the last one. And we will continue working to strengthen vet services within the region. Thank you very much. Go ahead, please, Erica. Thank you so much, Katia. As was already mentioned, this is a training initiative that is coordinated by the interagency partnership that was originated within the framework of GFTAT. And the mandate is to coordinate training on issues related to African swine fever preparation and eradication. IICA leads this initiative, and we are composed by several agencies such as the FAO, World Organization for Animal Health, CVP, CAPSA, and COPEG. Today's webinar is based on policies and compensation experiences with the main goal of providing information to all of the Americas and Caribbean countries on the practical tools available for compensation mechanisms and experience in Spain, Asia, Africa, and Dominican Republic. Our experts will be sharing their knowledge. Dr. Miguel Iguera, who will share his experience from Spain, Dr. Johnson with his presentation from Asia, Dr. Penrith, who will talk about their African experience. I would like to clarify that the agenda says that it will be South Africa, but in fact, she will be talking about her vast involvement in Africa at large. And last but not least, Engineer Fernandez will be sharing the Dominican Republic experience. I would like to underscore that Engineer Fernandez has had some issues to connect. We hope that throughout the morning, he manages to do so. So we will start now with our first presentation by Dr. Miguel Ángel Iguera. Mr. Iguera has vast professional experience at the National Pig Producing Agency. He was the director of this organization from 2007 to 2011. He was also a part of ProInserva, which is an association, a national association of pig producers in Spain. From 2006 to 2007, he was the technical director of two genetic agencies. From 2004 to 2006, he's the technical vet director of meat producer. He worked at a specialized pig producing company with semen dilutants. From 2001 to 2004, he was in the technical vet department in Spain, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And from 2000 to 2001, he was part of the embryo pig vitrification, insemination, and embryo harvesting in order to do the vitrification and freezing technique. He has also been the communicator director of the porcine pig sector. He has participated as a speaker in over 200 congresses and over 100 articles published in different specialized magazines. He is currently the president of the National Association of Pig Producers in Spain. So we welcome him so that he can share his vast experience on this topic. You have the floor, Doctor. Please go ahead. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good night to everyone. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be here to participate in this seminar to talk about a disease that is both a concern and something that involves us all. I will share my screen if you allow me. Can you please confirm that you can visualize my screen? I will be speaking in Spanish, but my presentation, to make the lives easier of interpreters, is in English. We will be dealing with ASF and the different measures that were taken, how we dealt with them in Spain. Before we start directly speaking about ASF, I would like to talk about this slide, because this slide presents the challenge that we will face when you try to control and eradicate African swine fever. The virus, it's not just the products, but also the environment. So when you want to eradicate the disease, you don't need to think just about the animals, but about many other issues. And this is what complicates the control aspects, prevention, eradication, and compensation aspects. I will talk about the Spanish experience in African swine fever eradication. Spain, for you to have a general idea, tested positive in 1965, a year after it started in Portugal. It went from Africa to Europe. It went through Portugal, and because of an illegal movement of animals from Portugal to Spain, it came to Spain. We had the disease over 30 years, and we managed to eradicate it in 1995. In 1985, excuse me. So as a Spanish technician specialized in the pig sector, I would like to share what we have done in Spain, but obviously we don't want to be an example per se, because it took us 30 years to eradicate it. So the awareness and the specific program, that is to say, including the sector and the government, the process started in 1985. So from 1965 to 1985, we were a country that imported pig-derived products, and the disease was not controlled. So we lived with the disease for over 20 years in 1985 before we became a member of the European Union. Well, we decided to seriously have an ASF eradication program. This is just for introduction means. These are the 6 key elements that our eradication program had in Spain. The first one, to have a vet team, 126 vets in the fields. We had mobile vets in the different farms with a vehicle and a driver that was the transportation means for the vets to do all of the testing. We provided periodical serological testing of the animals. We improved all sanitary infrastructures. This is key for compensation, of course. And once there was an outbreak detection of the disease, we identified and also sacrificed or slaughtered all carriers. And then we had a vet control of swine movements with individual identification of every animals. We had backyard production at that time, and 100% of backyard exports. Any site had to be identified and record the animals in order to detect the disease, and then afterwards the repopulation. What are non-negotiable aspects when or upon establishing the program? In our context in 1985, first, we had backyard farm definition and registration. All the byproducts of these animals were never released into the market. This is just for domestic consumption. It cannot be shared with brothers or sisters or cousins. Biosecurity rules by law. We have royal decrees. We have some minimum regulations, and also both big farmers, the slaughterhouses, the government, they were all in agreement to do this, of course, because that was the only way to control and eradicate the disease. Traceability is not within compensation, but it's very important. When you detected an outbreak, you had to identify the slaughterhouses and recall products from all of these slaughterhouses. So that is to say, if it had not been consumed, it was recalled and destroyed. And of course, nothing makes sense if you do not have government support. That is why this is the most relevant part of it. Payment of the animals of positive farms at a higher price or improved price from market price. And this is just a snapshot of our official bulletin where we have our regulations in Spain. This dates back to 1985. It's a scan, it's not digitalized. This is the Royal Decree 425, 1985, which specifies the eradication of African swine fever. You see Article 2, well, it states 2C and 3 that the elimination of outbreaks of disease will be carried out immediately with the hygienic slaughter and destruction of the animals of the affected farm in accordance with the provisions of Article 8 of the epizootic law. Likewise, the corresponding epizootiological survey will be carried out in order to know the origin of the disease. The owners of the animals subject to compulsory slaughter should be compensated. This is important. if they had complied with the governmental standards. So not all of them would be compensated because compensation was based on compliance with the law. I am just giving you a bit of a background of what we've done, and then we will talk about the specific compensation measures. But I thought it would be interesting how with these very simple measures, we were able to implement the eradication process. And then this specifies how the animals had to be compensated for. So a compensation for, this is of course 1985, as of 100 and, well, you have conversion of exchange rates, but you can read the different equivalences. The compensation scale for fattened animals from 21 kilograms live weight was of 105 pesetas per live kilo. Of course, these data go back to 1985. In Spain, we have the Iberic, and this had a differential price, 135 pesetas per live kilo. And as you can see back there, you have the equivalence in the exchange rate. But also, apart from this, we established additional specs in order to motivate or urge farmers to prevent African swine fever. I won't show you the picture, but including Portugal, that is to say the Iberic Peninsula, both countries together, 100% of the surface area was African swine fever positive. So we had an outbreak, or we have a presence of this disease in the entire peninsula. So to urge farmers to improve their farms, to protect and prevent outbreaks, we needed to establish different types of or additional types of payment measures. And here we see the details because it wasn't clear enough in the previous slide.
This would indicate that they were going to be paid 70 pesetas per kilogram, and that would be around $0.35, and up to 20 kilograms of live weight was 2,350 pesetas, which is around 14.15 euros per animal. So the most important thing here is that then this amounts could be increased in a certain percentage based on other health considerations. At that time, we also had the classic swine fever. And back then, animals were being vaccinated for that. So if you already had the classic swine fever and then you had an outbreak of African swine fever, you would slaughter your animals and you would get a 15% additional pay. And if you had this certification by this 126 vets that we had distributed throughout Spain, and it was determined that you had some adequate hygiene conditions over average, you would add an additional surplus that would go between 5 and 10%. If you had good biosecurity, that it was fencing throughout your farm, you get an additional 5% increase in your payment. If you belong to an association for health, and or that is those owners of livestock that would get together to work on this, you would get also an additional percentage. And then belonging to an initial sanitation group, you would get another 20%. You also had the option that if you didn't have any group for health defense, you could also belong to a different kind of association, but oftentimes those were not simultaneous. You either belong to one type of organization that would be of a health defense or other type of health group. And so if your farm had already been analyzed previously, and after the analysis of 100% of the animals, it was said to be free from African swine fever, and because of external circumstances, you get infected again, you would have an additional 20% increase. And then in the case that you had in this case for fattening farm with a health guarantee, and that they were certified as such, you would have an additional 20%. So this was the objective, to motivate farmers to invest on health measures. And one of the things that scared us the most back then in Spain was people not reporting cases, for the farmer to know that there were certain symptoms showing that there was African swine fever, because we had been living with it 20 years, and then the disease would keep on moving freely throughout the country. But of course, with these measures, and if you were to have this African swine fever outbreak, the person would be interested in obtaining this very interesting compensation. And when you depopulate a farm, you also eliminate all the other diseases that you may have, and you repopulate with animals with better genetic profiles. And you know that if you're getting paid for the depopulation of a farm and the return on investment is good, then that might be of interest for people. What are the failures of the system? Well, this is something I have to mention as well. At the beginning, the payment system was via an insurance system. So the slaughter was informed, and then the insurance would pay the farm. And the experts who were involved back then working in the swine or the pig sector knew that this system only lasted for 15 days. And sometimes the insurance wouldn't pay, and so the word was spread that the insurance was not paying the compensation for the animals you were slaughtering. So people were not reporting any suspicion. So the insurance was eliminated because it didn't work. And then it became under the Ministry of Agriculture. And this was a vital step, because if a farmer is not aware of two aspects, one, of knowing the amount of money he's getting and when he's getting it, the risk of non-reporting is very high. So if we had a fair price, a good payment system, and things were working well. So this is the most important line. These are the requirements to be able to access to said payments, and the percentages that could be increased as well is for the farm to be included. And even if it was a backyard farm, everything had to be included in the official register of pig farms. If you're not included in the official register, you're not get paid. All animals had to be identified, whether it was 5,000 or 10,000. The third point was very, very important as well. You need to report suspicion as well. If you don't do the reporting of suspicion, you don't get payments. So if you have an official control in your farm and the disease is detected in your farm without you informing of that, your animals will be slaughtered and you won't get any payment. And if there's no reporting of suspicion, you won't get paid. So obviously there were some cases of suspicion that were negative false. There were problems in the farm that didn't have to do with African swine fever, but 100% of the animals were analyzed, and then it turned out that there was no AFS. It was a false positive. That was not a problem. The farm just goes on as usual, or business as usual. It was best to have false positives than not having this reporting of suspicion. Then we had the confirmation of suspicion, then the mobilization and drawing up of a farm slaughter report by the official veterinarian services with the number of animals that were slaughtered. And back then, the farmer would include the account number where the payment had to be made. And in less than 2 weeks after stamping out, less than 2 weeks later, they would receive the payment for the slaughtering of the animals. And when it was determined that there was a farm insurance and the payments were not being received, and that was known all over, and then people heard that the ministry was paying in less than 2 weeks, people heard about that too, and people were not afraid of slaughtering their animals because they were getting paid in less than 2 weeks. And this was done until we eradicated ASF. Obviously, epidemiological circumstances change. And in the year 1999 to 2000, we had 2 or 3 outbreaks of classic swine fever that were eradicated with slaughters. And there was no need to vaccinate or anything, but that led us to update the rules and legislation. So we did update the classic swine fever, which is the decree that I'm showing you, the 1071/2002, because this is where we have the new compensation fees for the slaughtering of pigs. And this is for classic swine fever. If we were to have classical swine fever again, the slaughter ratios would be this that we will see in a moment. I'm just going to stop here for a moment because I believe this is to be important. And this is what is in force nowadays in case we had any sort of fever. In Spain, we have 2 types of pigs, the precocious breeds, and we also have their crosses, the Iberic pigs. And they have different compensation schedules. So on the one hand, we have the conventional breeds and their crosses, where we have the stallions, which would be paid with 420 euros per unit. We're still talking about around $400 per animal. The breeding females, 300 euros per animal. The piglets weighing less than 10 kilograms of live weight would get 30 euros per unit. The piglets weighing between 10 and 20 kilograms of live weight, once they've been weaned, they would be the report of the piglet of less than 10, and then you would add the amount obtained by multiplying the number of piglets weighing more than 10 kilograms. That would be then by the arithmetic mean of the selected and normal classes by the 20 kilogram piglet recorded at the Segovia market in the week preceding the slaughter. And those additional kilos will be already added to the price of the piglet weighing less than 10 kilograms. Now, animals weighing more than 20 and less than 90 kilograms of live weight, the amount of the 20 kilogram piglet calculated is indicated in the previous paragraph and shall be increased by the amount of the kilograms exceeding 20. This formula that you see here is not correct. This is the correct one. This is the formula that you would use to include the animals that were under 20 kilograms. So the price would be to the animal that weighs less than 20 kilos would get this increment, the F. That would be the value of a pig of 90 kilograms live weight, and the value of the animals that have 20 kilos divided by 70, which is the mean, and multiplied by the number of additional kilograms. So this is the value in the market. Why do we do this complicated formula? Because of the different markets we have in the Spain. If we have the market for slaughter, and then we have also the 20 kilograms. So any animal that may be in between those phases, in between those weights, does not have a specific price. So we needed to establish this parameter, this formula for their payment. So it's either 20, 25, 35, 55, 70, or 80 kilograms. We can then identify which is the payable amount for that animal. As after 110 kilograms of live weight, those will get a discount from the market price. So we have, if they are increasing their weight, then you have to apply the percentage reduction in euros kilogram. So just to give you an example, if you have an animal between 120 and 125 kilograms of live weight, you have to apply a percentage reduction of 3.3% over the price of the live weight. So the market is like it is today, between 1.10 euros per kilo of live weight, you would have to apply a percentage reduction of 3.3%, and we would be paying around 1.7 euros of a kilogram of live weight for those 120 kilograms of that animal. Now, we also have a different table for the Iberian trunk and its hybrids. And I'm just showing this so that I can show you that compensation varies depending on the type of animal. In the Iberian trunk, the price is higher, and so we will have some higher fees or compensation fees. And we also kept an additional payment of 10% if you belong to these animal healthcare associations. So all the farmers from a region share and are part of this association. And so if you belong to this type of organization and you work for the health in your entire area, well, you would get a 10% increase. And almost to conclude, I just wanted to mention that since African swine fever is something that is of great concern to us, we have the practical manual for African swine fever. In Spain, we never stopped controlling the swine fever, and we developed a passive and active surveillance system for it. I think we're the country that has the largest number of AFS controls because of the years we have been doing that. And then we have this practical manual for African swine fever control operations. You can find that in our website, the website of our ministry. Now, what matters here is that we have already a table where you can estimate this the price or the fee. So depending on what the veterinarian or the inspector says, first we have the number of registration of the farm. If the farm is not registered, you don't get paid. Then the data of the farm, and then the number of animals present in the farm with the mean weight to be able to apply the compensation tables accordingly. So this would be the normal procedure if we were faced with the suspicion of African swine fever in Spain. First, we would have to communicate the immobilization and slaughter of the animals. On the one hand, if we go to the right, we establish all the surveillance and protection zones around that outbreak. Several kilometers, and then on the left we have the location of all the products obtained from the exploitation since the virus was detected or introduced. First, we need to look for meat, ova, sperm, urine, feces, and so on and so forth, or feedstuff, or any other substance that may be a contaminant. Why? Because we need to destroy it all. And obviously, when we communicate immobilizations and slaughter of the animals, they need to be slaughtered, and they are slaughtered in the farm, and then they are taken to a plant to be incinerated, and then the sample is taken there to see what the level of positivity is. And once the animals are slaughtered, we have then the minutes for the calculation of how many animals need to be paid for or compensated for. Then we have the epidemiological survey of the animals, the vehicles, the people, the substances, and products. And then we also have the lead on the disinfection and cleanliness of this. And so this is something that is being done by the farm, is not something done by the farm, but by the administration. The payment for the disinfecting process is paid for by the government, and the competent authority has to approve it, because that's where time will start for repopulating the farm. In the case of African swine fever, the repopulation of the farm will depend on whether the outbreak had any problems with biological vectors, for example, ticks that we have in Spain, or if we have not had any biological vectors. If we have had any biological vectors, the repopulation of the farm can be done after 40 days. If there is a biological vector, and this is very important, if there is a biological vector in the transmission of disease and no hygiene system is implemented in that farm has to wait before it becomes repopulated for 6 years. It has to wait for 6 years if no hygiene system is implemented to get rid of the tick. And the way we provide money to the farm now is the FEGA, which is the Spanish Fund for Agricultural Guarantee. This is how we allow for people to get aid for any type of subvention in the EU. So everything is handled through this organization. They are in charge of making the payments based on the tables we saw before. And the most important thing here is that as being part of the European Union, these may also be part of the VET European Fund. And so each country can establish its own control and eradication systems, and that they will be supported by the EU. And in the case of countries that have African swine fever, the payment by EU over the farm that had to be slaughtered is 50%. That is 50% of what has to be given to the farm comes from the EU funds, and the other 50% comes from national funds. And this is very important, particularly because in the EU, you guarantee that if there's an outbreak, there is a possibility to obtain a compensation, and things are being controlled and prevent the propagation of the disease. And something else that's important, we need to destroy and eliminate all the feed stuff. In Spain, we pay for the destruction, but we don't pay for the value of feedstuff. Let's say we have 5,000 kilograms of feedstuff and they have to be destroyed. Well, we pay the amount of the burning of said product, but not the price of the feedstuff. In the case of hay, let's say the farms have hay or other materials, all biological materials that are in contact with animals have to be equally destroyed. The product is not paid for, but the destruction is paid for. And the case where you have pigs sent to the slaughterhouse, we try to recover all the products from that slaughter during the previous month from the moment the outbreak is detected in that farm, because we also don't want to run the risk of having a disease in the farm for that many days and maybe it was not being detected. So we also get rid of this. And lastly, we have been working on insurance, because obviously there are certain things that are not being covered in the compensation payments. Obviously, if we have a positive farm, that is not being covered. But once the animals are slaughtered, and even though the animals are being paid for, that farm for a certain time will not be able to produce. So we will have a loss of profit for a certain time. So we're looking for insurance that might actually pay for that time that you are down until the moment you can produce again. Another element that may be insured may be the repopulation of the farm, the value of buying new animals. And the most complicated part would be the shortcomings in the market. If there is African swine fever, the markets drop, and then that difference in prices might also be insured. So this is something that we're trying to do. We tried this maybe 2 or 3 years ago to have an insurance against African swine fever, but currently in the EU, the risk is so high that there's currently no insurance company that may dare to have a specific insurance for African swine fever. The risk oversees the benefit, and so right now we don't have an insurance of this kind. And the last thing, and just out of curiosity, I just wanted to show you what was the evolution of the program of the eradication of African swine fever. This was when it was started in 1985, 100% of a country infected. Then 1989, we had the free area, and even some animals products could be exported. The red part coincides with the traditional of Iberian trunk, which was the hardest to eradicate, of course. And then 1991, where we had a part where we didn't have any outbreaks, but we had in the area where is the red area, the vector area. Then 1993, the area then became less, started reducing, that was in the Huelva and in Cáceres. 1994, again, we only had a few
some
areas in
infected
that.
areas. In
Mountain
December
range in
1994,
we only had
only
four
had,
places where this
four
African swine fever
areas.
was
In
detected.
July
And in July
1995, there
there
were
was no
detected
outbreak.
areas.
And
in
in
December
December 1995, Spain was officially declared free of ASF after 10 years of an eradication program. And that's all. I hope I was able to give you a historical and current vision of what we do with African swine fever in Spain.
Interesante. Avanzando con la agenda.
Very interesting presentation, Dr. Miguel Ángel Iguera. We will now start with the Asian experience compensation in ASF from Dr. Wayne Johnson. Dr. Wayne Johnson experience is that in 1980, he was part of the consultative service for pig producers up to date. In 2017 to 2019, training in the disease in agricultural processes. 2012, he was in consultantship with ARTECH, and he was part of the executive vet program for the Illinois University. He is a veterinary from the Illinois state, member of the American Association of Pig Practitioners in 1998 to 2005. He reincorporated in 2006. He has vast experience in IT, technologies applied to animals and feed. He's also a foreign expert on the Chinese Agricultural University from 1996 to March 1999. He was a visitor expert at the Dog pig industry from 1999 to February 2001. He has been awarded in China as the Pig Welfare Association Award and the Chinese Animal Husbandry and Veterinarian Association as China's top 10 innovations in 2017. So he has vast experience. We now give you the floor, doctor, for you to present. I would like to thank you for your participation. I would like to thank you for joining us. Please remember, you can post your questions in the chat box, and also for those who are connected in social media, you may do so as well. You can also add your country based or country of origin so that we know where you're joining us from. Go ahead, please, Dr. Wayne.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it now? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Sí.
Okay. I was very impressed with Miguel's presentation, and certainly that's a very mature program. African swine fever broke out in China in 2018 and very rapidly spread all over the country. And it was really a slow motion train wreck, and has continued to be a series of slow motion train wrecks here. And the disease has become endemic in China. We are now dealing with African swine fever as an endemic disease, along with things like pseudorabies and PRRS and classical swine fever, foot and mouth disease, porcine circovirus. It is among the endemic conditions that we are facing in pig production in China. So we are dealing with basically now a chronic endemic disease where we have obvious morbidity, mortality. There is what we might call subclinical disease for various reasons due to ASF. It could be due to people's sensitivity. There's lots of lost production. There's a lot of vaccination, a lot of things going on. Of course, there are some consumer issues. And of course, China has not been able to export pork, for in general, just because there's not only ASF but a number of other serious transboundary diseases. But finally, there comes a decision to clean up the endemic disease. It may be on a farm by farm basis, what we call elimination. There actually is no national program for eradication, but some producers have chosen to eliminate the disease for various reasons. Maybe because the difficult economic conditions makes the chronic production losses intolerable. Maybe there's a demand for clean animals, particularly if you're selling breeding stock, and various regulatory forces. And this is what we're going to see, of course, in the Caribbean in some situations, that the globalization is going to bring some pressure onto some areas that we don't see in China. But if you're near some other large countries that are producing pigs and don't have ASF, there's going to be some pressure to actually do something. The various strategies for eliminating serious viral diseases are fairly standard, and but some of them don't work for ASF. We can test and destroy infected herds. We can depop and repop. We can test and remove infected animals. What is very popular in China, it's called tooth pulling. The stabilize, test, and replace doesn't work. Partial depopulation certainly works very well because it doesn't move through the air to any extent. In some situations, you may be able to do a partial depop and get rid of it. We indeed have done that quite successfully. The test and destroy strategy, that whenever some important transboundary disease is discovered, the entire sow herd and everything is destroyed, burned, and or buried or sent to slaughter. This is what we call the scorched earth policy, and this may be done whenever the disease first breaks out. Whenever ASF broke out in China, there was quite a bit of this going on. There was some animals buried alive, and some sent to slaughter, and some injected with organophosphate insecticides to kill them, and then gradually some went to slaughter. But there were more animals to be slaughtered than what there were places to slaughter them, and the price of pigs became very low in some areas. Depop and repop. This indeed is an option, and some people have had to do this. We'll touch on it a bit more. Test and remove infected animals. This is a viable strategy for many diseases, and in the case of ASF, it works pretty well because the disease moves rather slowly at first. If you catch it, you could get rid of it, but just simply by removing the infected animals and continuously doing this. Now, some herds have chosen to just use this as a production method, that they continuously are removing infected animals, and they have teams of people that go out and take oral swabs and oral fluids and do a tremendous amount of testing, and then whenever they find that they're in trouble, they'll ship the whole group. And so then this has worked out okay for some people, but for other people it's been not very good. The ASF problem, about the only tools that we have are elimination and biosecurity, And it's said in China to get rid of it, we'd have to change the whole swine industry. And you can see that's what they did in Spain. They changed the way that things were operating. And finally, you have to change the way that things are happening if you're going to see any significant change in the way that things are going. The pig farm inputs, the word pig is covered up here by my camera, but the trucks are the big deal in at least in China for moving it around. Everybody's excited about people. They want to bathe people in disinfectant, but it's really the trucks that have been the issue. There was infected pork brought it in. And then by trucks, it moved everywhere. A lot of garbage feeding was going on, and the trucks then have moved it everywhere very quickly. And the slaughterhouses, a lot of loads of dead pigs going to the slaughterhouse, and then the trucks go from the slaughterhouse back to the farm, often without being cleaned, or in the cold weather that's impossible to get them clean, and no real way to get this thing under control, because the farms are afraid of the truck drivers. They're afraid that they won't haul their pigs, and there's really some problem. So initially the idea was that if you'd create restricted zones and have the pigs move by permit only, and then depopulate the infected farms, that this would work. But what we had happen with the restricted zones is that the price of pigs became very high in the restricted zones, and in the depop zones, pigs were very cheap, and so people were hauling the pigs through the mountains all night. You could make a lot of money, maybe $100 a pig, $200 a pig, just simply by hauling them over the mountain. So this was going on, and pretty much abolished the idea of that zones was going to help at all. Finally, they gave up on this idea and then went to a test and remove policy. And again, this was become very popular as tooth pulling. And it's easy enough to get rid of the ASF if you remove the infected animals, but it's quite a challenge to keep it from coming back if you don't change the way that you're managing the trucks. Then the next thing then that happened was that they started to vaccinate. The illegal vaccine came in, a double gene deleted vaccine. They vaccinated everywhere, not everybody vaccinated, but in all over China they vaccinated. And then we got into the problem that the vaccine virus causes a mild form of the disease. It interacts with the field virus, and then the problem of testing and removal becomes very, very difficult, because they don't produce enough virus that you can remove them. You can't find them, and so finally the persistent infection and the problem with the sows, that finally they just decided to depop and repop some of these herds, and there were a tremendous number of sows that were vaccinated that ended up being slaughtered because simply they become non-productive and creating a lot of trouble. Finally, the idea here about zero tolerance, that if you want to really get rid of this thing, you've got to take blood samples. A lot of people want to do oral swabs. It's easy. They're afraid to take blood, but the negative oral swab, it doesn't really mean anything if it still could be positive animal. Sometimes people would pop out lymph nodes. Antibody testing now is becoming popular, that we've got antibody and antigen testing, and then to decide with groups of gilts, if they're positive for antigen or antibody, decide to keep them or to cull them. Probably the best thing to do if they're if anything is positive here, just tank the whole group, and that has been fairly effective in terms of getting it eliminated down in the herds that have decided to stand and fight. It's generally said that there are three key elements in getting rid of ASF. The first one being slaughterhouse monitoring. We heard about that. The trace back of the pigs to the farm origin. Now, this is on the books in China. They have laws on the books, but they're not followed. And so since they're not followed, nothing really happens. And then finally, the third thing is that you need indemnity payments for forced depopulation. And there is very little of that that is actually done. Now, under what we consider to be the Lockean forms of government, the property belongs to the people. The purpose of government is to protect people's life, liberty, and property, and the police power is there to protect people from one another. And in the U.S. Constitution, we have what we call the Takings Clause of the First Amendment. That's this line down here at the bottom, that private property will not be taken for public use without giving some compensation. Now, some countries, they don't have any such thing as this. There is a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which includes the same kind of Lockean principles that if you take something from people, if the government has to take it, if the society decides they have to take your animals because you've got ASF or some problem, they have to stop you from doing what you're doing, they have to pay you for what they took. Now, in some countries, actually, that doesn't happen. We've got maybe sometimes it seems like authority might just simply be enough, but really we need people's cooperation. And this is the thing that if you have authority, people try to find some way to get around it. If you have some way where you can encourage people's cooperation, that's a good thing. And so this is ensured by a program where you have some kind of fair compensation. So the compensation is the payment to the farm for its forced destruction of their property. And this could be the same thing as if a interstate or a railroad was going to go through where your home is. And we have people who fight that and people who find some way to get the most out of it. And we have all kinds of, and then have everything in between. So you've got growing animals we heard about, breeding animals that's sent to slaughter, their loss of their breeding value, the destruction, the cost of disposal, the cost of the farm being down for a while. Now, in some of the situations with ASF, we never stopped production. We just simply, the government didn't want to know about it. They didn't want to hear that the animals had ASF. We reported it. They said, you don't want to report it. We don't want to know about it. And so the people had to find some way on their own to figure out what to do. And quite often it's the idea is somehow to get the sick animals separated from the healthy animals, and that might be whole buildings or it might be individual pigs out of a building. Certainly the whole building plan works a lot better than trying to get the individual animals out, what they call the tooth pulling. We would take the whole section out. The thing doesn't go through the air very much, and so it is possible to get rid of it simply by eliminating an entire gestation barn or a finishing barn, and ship those out and ship out the barns around them and get rid of it that way, because there isn't any compensation going to come. Now, it's on the books that they're supposed to pay for these animals if they say that they're going to close the farm. And so the way they get around that is they simply say, okay, we don't know about it. So who pays for this? And so it could be the local government has to pay, or the federal government, the national government, or there's some kind of sharing. And finally, they ended up down to where, okay, the local government's supposed to pay 50%, and the federal government is supposed to pay 50%. But the local government, if they admit that they have this problem, they're going to be punished for letting the ASF be in their area. And so the leaders that allowed ASF to occur, if they admit it, they're going to be punished. And so nobody wants to admit that they've got it. And so then that also works pretty good, because then if you don't admit that you've got it, then you don't have it. It doesn't have to be reported to the OIE, just report just a few. There were 25 pigs over here that were captured and they were killed and it's over with. They send this kind of stuff to the OIE, and the thousands and thousands of pigs that get slaughtered or have to get put in the ground, nobody hears about that, and it just keep it quiet. They don't get paid for it. Maybe they might get access to money, they might get access to land, they might get loans, but indemnity payments and structured programs, basically no such thing. So, and then we finally get into the problem, well, who decides how much? And so you've got veterinarians where you've got a team of veterinarians and you have, educated, licensed veterinarians. Then you have the possibility, but where there's not this sort of thing in the structure, then who decides? There's the idea about fraudulent infections. We have people going around with drones spreading the disease so they could buy the pigs cheap, sneaking into the farms at night and putting the disease in, throwing dead pigs out at the driveway, and then showing up and saying that they were from the government. Lots of fraud. There's lots of unreliable diagnostic techniques. How much does it cost for the project? Who's going to pay for this? And when is it going to happen? So these things, and so where you've got a situation where they say, okay, you can get paid in 2 weeks for your pigs, then everybody sounds that's really happy. But typically, where there is any payment, it could be several months before you get it, if you get it at all. Then a surveillance program is really the basis for all control methods. You've got to have some kind of way to trace back the ID from the slaughterhouse to the farm of origin, some kind of verified production controls, some methods. There needs to be some auditing. Somebody has to go out and see that it's really happening. Some testing to confirm that there's a negative status, that they're not using the vaccine. Some kind of certificates so that they can do things. It's been suggested, so a license for commercial sales. You couldn't sell wean pigs or feeder pigs or market hogs or breeding animals unless you were certified negative, that you were inside some kind of a biosecurity program. Again, of course, these are ideas. These things are not happening. These are ideas. Slaughterhouse surveillance, again, it's on the books to do this, but it doesn't happen. Some people are using the strip ELISA kits. They're not sensitive enough to pick it up, so they're very convenient. The lamp test, the PCR test are pretty good. The antibody testing, we've got a lot of pigs that are exposed, but the virus is hard to detect. They vaccinated them, but we could find them with antibody. And then we have people that are wanting to make super pigs. They find that some of the pigs will survive, and so they think, okay, we'll make a line of super pigs from these, and there's even scientific papers published about these, what genes that they have, that they're able to resist the virus somehow. They're chronic. These are chronic pigs that are tolerant of ASF, but they are spreading the disease. Recording and follow-up, we need information, and we need knowledge of the enemy. It's just like any other war that you're fighting. You need military intelligence. You need to know what the enemy is doing. And then with the slaughter surveillance, maybe some sort of a phased program so that we know that the farm is advised to we know that they're selling ASF pigs and that they're advised you need to take some action. And maybe in the second phase, they're required to file an ASF control and elimination plan so that you're going to do something about it. Phase 3, that the farm is said, well, we've got it down pretty much, and now you're going to be restricted. You can't just do whatever you want to unless there's some evidence that you really have a program, that you've got a consulting veterinarian or a regular veterinarian or your staff are doing something about it. And in the final phase, they're put under some kind of a notice that you've got 30 days, 60 days, 120 days to get cleaned up, or we're going to come and take you out of business, more or less, some difficult way. Again, the slaughterhouses this is the continuous source of the disease in China is the slaughterhouse. The pigs are coming back, and it's what we call it's the supermarket of disease, the Baihuodalo. They have everything that just like Kmart or Walmart. If you want it, they've got it at the slaughterhouse, and so you send your trucks there, and you don't it's a little bit, you don't always get what you want, but you'll get something. And so the grade A facilities would only receive healthy pigs. This is something like compartmentalization, that you have a system that all of the pigs are sent to their own slaughterhouse, and the grade B facility might, by permission, receive ASF positive pigs on some certain days of the month or the week. Grade C facility, they can receive pigs at any time, and then there's lots of unregulated things that are going on. Currently, almost everything is in the unregulated status, even though that there's laws on the books that they're supposed to be doing some of these things. That the system is not there to enforce it and to actually make it work. And so finally, it gets down to we have to change people's behavior. And up on the top section of this, I've got the traditional idea about a pig farm, and it's making something just a farm that somebody's got the backyard pigs, maybe one or two pigs, and they're traditional in the way that they do things. And in the bottom half here, we've got a modernized farms, and they're producing food products. Everything is modernized, and the sound is the same. The bottom one is a factory. The top one has a piece of ground, and we have a conflict between these two things. Of course, our heart is with the people that are doing it the traditional way, what we grew up with, but our minds are with the people that are trying to do a better job, and trying to of course the ideal situation is where you've got the traditional thinking, and you've got a high quality job being done. So in Asia in general, there isn't any real payment program. There isn't any real control program, but people who are raising pigs are pretty much on their own. In almost every case in Asia, they really don't want the government to know that they have the problem, and in some cases, the government doesn't want to know. And so we really don't have good intelligence about what is happening with the disease. And of course, with time, we expect this to change. But if the pig market is really high and they're making money, they really don't care very much. Of course, presently, they're not making money, and they're maybe losing quite a bit of money. So it's quite possible that we're going to see some change, that as this thing starts to hit them in the pocketbook, as we say, then gradually we will see something happening. But there's not very much participation by the government. If you talk about the huge amount of pigs that we have in China, half the pigs in the world essentially are in China, and if you're talking about a EU Spain level program, the cost of this program, although it really may be a wonderful program, trying to decide who is going to pay for that. There isn't any EU that China is part of that is going to come in and pay for half of the bill for China. So they're kind of on their own. Well, I perhaps I went through that a little quick, but that's all I have to say about it. And so whenever it's time for questions, we can do that. And thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Dr. Wayne Johnson. Excelente presentación.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wayne Johnson. Your presentation was very interesting. Remember that at the end, we will have a Q&A session. You are a bit shy in terms of your questions posted in the chat. So go ahead, please post your comments, your questions. And so far we have a few countries letting us know they're here, like Mexico, Venezuela, Peru, Argentina, Bolivia, Uruguay, Panama, Brazil, Honduras, Colombia, Jamaica, Bahamas, the US, Italia, Ebony here. And so, welcome all. Chile is with us as well. I just read that in the chat. So let's continue with our next expert. She's Mary Louise Penrith. She will be talking to us about her experience in Africa. She was born and educated in South Africa, and after almost 25 years in zoological and entomological research, she gained a PhD degree in both fields. And she qualified as a veterinarian in 1991 and joined the pathology section of the Onderstepoort Veterinary Institute in Pretoria. She developed a particular interest in pig diseases, and soon she became involved in African swine fever. And she had the privilege to perform consultancies for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, in 9 countries in East and West Africa on epidemiology and control of ASF, as well as similar missions in the republics of Georgia and Armenia. Said consultancies covered a period of 20 years, 4 of which were spent as a consultant on laboratory management in Mozambique. During all that time, she coordinated a DANITA-funded project on improving smallholder pig health and production in Mozambique, and was an advisor to a subsequent project in Mozambique and Tanzania. She is currently an extraordinary professor at the Department of Veterinary Tropical Diseases, the University of Pretoria. She supervises and teaches postgraduate students. And she's still involved as an ASF expert in FAO and OIE. Her passion is to help resource-poor smallholder pig farmers to protect their pigs against AFS and other diseases. Based in this vast experience on AFS, we would like to welcome Dr. Penrith. Go ahead, doctor.
Thank you. I will share my screen if I may. Oi, too quick. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this webinar series. I follow 2 very difficult acts to follow, and in fact, talking about African experiences of compensation in response to African swine fever outbreaks, I could finish quite quickly by saying, well, it's very unusual. But I think I'm expected to say a little bit more than that, so I'll tell you why it's unusual and what happens when we try. African swine fever is endemic in most sub-Saharan African countries. The Eastern and Southern African region, this is important because the Eastern and Southern African region is different from everywhere else in the world. And we have more than a century of experience of African swine fever. It evolved in a sylvatic cycle between warthogs, that pretty animal in the first cycle here, and soft ticks of the Ornithodorus mobata complex that live in their burrows, and the disease is endemic in African wild steers. They do not transmit the disease easily at all, and they show no signs of illness, but transmission from the warthogs to domestic pigs or other African steers is by ticks. It's also endemic in most domestic pigs in domestic pigs in most of the countries in the region. That's the third cycle there. And my focus is going to be on West Africa and the Indian Ocean region, where African swine fever was introduced as an exotic disease. And they only have the cycle through the domestic pigs because our situation is too complicated. You don't want to know about it. So I will be talking about an epidemic that hit 5 West African countries in the 90s. And also in 2007, it hit the tiny Mauritian island of Mauritius. And I will be talking about those countries. Africa has mostly low-income countries, and compensation for losses due to animal diseases or their control is not an option unless external funding is available. Supportive legislation may also be lacking. Most of our pig producers are smallholders. The commercial sector is very small, and Africa accounts for slightly less than 5% of the world's pig population. And yet we managed to export African swine fever 3 times. Few countries export pork at all, and it's mainly within the region. So there's very little incentive from a trade point of view to invest in eradication because the financial gain would be too low to be significant. And then the dynamic smallholder sector, which accounts for more than 80% of the pigs in almost all the African countries, means that information about the numbers and the location of the pigs is usually inadequate or lacking, which makes it very difficult to plan when you want to do something like culling with compensation. Eradication has very rarely been achieved and even more rarely been sustained. I'll give you some examples of the challenges that I mentioned. Where legislation is not supportive. In 1993, Kenya experienced outbreaks in commercial farms around the capital of Nairobi for the first time in 30 years. The 1960s legislation that was in force at the time laid down compensation at 30 Kenya shillings per pig. But in the 90s, the value was 55 Kenya shillings per US dollar. So quite obviously, compensation of less than $1 per pig would not exactly be attractive. Then when you have a lack of information about the target population size and location, classical swine fever entered South Africa in 2005, and by 2006, they had decided to eradicate the pigs. The pigs in a province which had many households that kept a few free-ranging pigs. But only 3 districts were really affected, so they decided to eradicate an estimated maximum of 120,000 pigs with full market-related compensation. The final count of pigs culled was 498,000 pigs. South Africa is a middle-income country, but that outlay for control of an animal disease has had major downstream repercussions that we're still suffering from today. In 1997, Togo, a tiny little country in West Africa, had its first introduction of African swine fever. And in the first few foci, they were culling with market-related compensation. The country has phosphorus, so a bit better off than some of the others. But spread occurred and funds were used up. And this was followed by culling without compensation, which caused considerable resentment, seeing a lot of the farmers affected knew that there had been compensation at one time. So, as I mentioned, in 1996, an epidemic that started with the first introduction into Côte d'Ivoire spread to 5 other countries by 2003. And only Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana managed to eradicate African swine fever after the first incursion, and both have been reinfected. But in the other 4 countries, which were Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria, it became established endemically in the other 4 countries after the first incursion. The region received considerable support from the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, through expert consultations, improved laboratory diagnostic capacity, and rolling out of information campaigns, but the FAO does not provide funding for compensation. So in 1996 in Cote d'Ivoire, infection was first detected in a low-income Abidjan suburb in pigs that were fed waste that was collected from garbage skips in a more affluent suburb. To escape infection, a lot of the people in that low-income suburb moved the pigs to relatives in outlying villages, which spread the infection. And a decision was taken to cull all the pigs in the greater Abidjan area. Abidjan is the largest city in Cote d'Ivoire. And 80% of the country's commercial pig herd was there, and there were also free-ranging pigs in about 50 villages. Compensation was paid at 1/3 of market price, and the dissatisfaction provoked clandestine bush slaughter, as you see in the upper corner there. Deep in the forest, pigs were being slaughtered and the meat was being sold and spread around. And of course, there was further spread. And the cost of eradication was very high because it wasn't just the payments, but there were abandoned commercial pig farms. One farmer in the upper first segment there, was so distressed that he simply destroyed his entire farm. And that was not an uncommon reaction to what happened. In 2014, Cote d'Ivoire had another incursion. High mortality occurred mainly among free-ranging pigs in the port city San Pedro, which had not previously experienced African swine fever, but African swine fever was confirmed. A 10-kilometer radius was declared around the port, and all the pigs were culled, again with compensation set at 1/3 of market value. They say history doesn't always teach you the lessons you need. Pig owners were, of course, outraged, and there were negative effects, although eradication was achieved. Firstly, isolated and highly biosecure commercial farms also had their pigs culled, although they were healthy and had never had African swine fever, including in a project for the upliftment of women, which caused loss of very needed livelihoods. On the other hand, in an isolated, extremely poor fishing village that did not experience African swine fever, all the confined pigs were culled because it fell within the 10-kilometer radius. But the free-ranging pigs that you see there on the right bottom were spared because they couldn't be caught. Now, as the other FAO consultant and I just looked at each other and said, and what about our message that people should confine pigs? African swine fever incursions have again occurred in various parts of Cote d'Ivoire since 2016. First cases of African swine fever in Ghana were reported in October 1999 in the port city of Tema. In consultation with Commercial Pig Farmer Association, it was decided to cull only infected herds because the government people said to us, look, we've got some money, but we haven't got enough money to go madly culling in a marked out radius. And so we said, no, cull only the infected herds with market-related compensation for healthy pigs culled. Unaffected commercial farms were encouraged to move pigs under permit to a designated abattoir for slaughter and sale of pork through 2 designated retail outlets to prevent the clandestine slaughter and possible dangerous cross-border trade, because it was very close to Christmas and pork was very sought after for Christmas in Ghana. All the pigs had to be culled in affected villages who had kept all their pigs running around free. And we had to think with a compensation because the pig population included modern commercial breeds, as well as a much smaller local breed pig, the Ashanti dwarf pig, as well as hybrids. Compensation was fixed at the market price per kilogram for the village pigs because you couldn't very well pay the same price for a 4 to 5 kilogram weaner as for a 20 to 25 kilogram weaner. That wouldn't be fair. And African swine fever was eradicated by early 2000, but the country was reinfected from the north in 2002. And this was seen from after the culling had taken place in a large village. a portable scale was taken along, and the pig carcasses after the killing were weighed with their owners watching. And then the owners lined up and got their piece of paper with the value of the kilograms that they would receive. And within 3 to 5 days, a delegation arrived from the capital, Accra, and paid the people in cash. And that ensured cooperation there and elsewhere, and they were very happy. Benin became infected towards the end of 1997, another very small country. Most of the pigs were free-ranging village pigs, and because the south was forest and not suitable for other livestock, the pigs were more or less wall-to-wall in the south of the country. The commercial farmers immediately formed an association and agreed on measures to protect their farms, none of which were affected. And there you see a commercial farm where the pigs were not affected, they were very healthy, but in the surrounds of the farm, there were many free-ranging, scavenging pigs. A decision was taken to cull village pigs that were not confined without compensation. The people were asked to confine the pigs, and then the teams went out. But the villagers refused to confine their pigs. Unfortunately, roaming pigs, among other things, perform an important office of being the sanitation officers, so they didn't want to confine them. And the veterinary officials were attacked with sticks and stones when they arrived in villages. So in the first 2 weeks of the culling campaign, I think they managed to kill about 14 pigs. So with the good offices of the lead consultant for the FAO, funds were obtained from the World Bank for compensation, and the cooperation of the owners improved, but the disease had spread widely, and it was too little too late. It's still endemic in Benin. Then Mauritius, which is a tiny nation consisting of 2 small islands in the Indian Ocean. And in 2007, the first incursion of African swine fever occurred in the main island. All of the pigs there were confined because their main income is from tourists, and the philosophy in government is that tourists would not like to be stumbling over wandering pigs. Unfortunately, Mauritius had suffered 2 or 3 outbreaks of classical swine fever because their neighbor, the large island of Madagascar, has classical swine fever from way back. And so immediately these pigs started dying. They rushed around vaccinating everything and carrying African swine fever on their boots and on their needles and so on. So there was very high mortality that was due to the virulence of the virus. It's the very same virus that's now in China, by the way, and also due to the fact that it was being spread artificially through the vaccination campaign. Culling without compensation was carried out at infected premises only because there was not a lot of funding. Mauritius is reasonably well off, but certainly not well off enough to pay for a lot of dead pigs. And it came as a big shock. They couldn't plan for it. Also, the cooperation of the pig owners was very poor. There was not a very good relation between the veterinary services and the pig owners due to ethnic and religious differences. So many cases, only clinically sick pigs which the owners could see were going to die were culled. The other pigs were separated and observed with the help of the vets, and they were only culled if they developed clinical disease so that the people would be able to salvage whatever they could. The last outbreak occurred in July 2008. Fortunately, the pig population was relatively small. And after an extensive serological survey with negative results, Mauritius successfully submitted a self-declaration of freedom from ASF to OIE in 2012. And in spite of the fact that their neighbor Madagascar remains endemically infected with African as well as classical swine fever, Mauritius has not had either since then. So in Africa, we have to think about alternatives to market-related compensation. Now, obviously, one of the alternatives that you've heard about was compensation at less than market value, but it is counterproductive and it can encourage illegal activity and spread infection. And of course, it doesn't encourage reporting, but reporting is not exactly a big habit in Africa anyway. Mauritius offered soft loans to affected farmers to support recovery. But many of the farmers, particularly the older ones, were reluctant, especially, not to want to pass debt on to their heirs, so they didn't want to take a loan. And then compensation with nucleus breeding stock. It's been done with other species like cattle in Africa, and it's been discussed, and farmers who were approached about this method have always been enthusiastic about it, often saying that financial compensation was likely to be spent on necessities rather than on restocking. And we had a small experience of it in Ghana, where farms that had lost all their pigs to African swine fever, so were not eligible for compensation because the pigs hadn't been culled, they had died. When a sentinelization was put in place to put sentinels on the farms, a small number of pigs, to check whether there was any infection, and if they remained healthy, the farm could be restocked in time. But we arranged that the sentinel pigs would be a nucleus breeding herd with at least one male. They were intact piglets, and they were distributed to the farms, and you could see the farmers were receiving them with great delight. None of them developed African swine fever, because 6 weeks is a long time for a farm to recover from an outbreak. And they had their breeding herd. And then when it comes to the control, to try to minimize the costs if you're going to do any compensation, well, first of all, you do modified stamping out to minimize the number of healthy pigs that are culled and have to be paid for. You either do culling only infected herds, or you really do a sort of a tooth pulling, culling only sick pigs with isolation and observation, or even testing of pigs that don't show clinical signs. Fortunately, nowhere in Africa has vaccination been tried, so we've still got pretty virulent disease. And then we have also considered in South Africa, with our subsistence farmers, investing in prevention incentives to minimize the likelihood of outbreaks in the first place. And these could be possibly premium prices at abattoirs for farms that have been certified to have a good level of biosecurity. We have most of our commercial herd in South Africa is in compartments, so they are very much certified and for export. But these are small little commercial farms and backyard farmers who could never reach that level, but they could be certified on a group of very basic biosecurity measures that are adequate for African swine fever, because it's a very directly transmitted disease. And then another possibility is supermarket vouchers or other rewards for pig owners whose pigs are protected and escape infection during an outbreak. It happened that there were outbreaks in a sort of peri-urban area, poorish area in one of our provinces, and it was decided to confiscate any meat that pork that they might have put in a deep freezer or a fridge somewhere during the outbreak. And the Department of Social Services came in with hampers of food to exchange for the meat, and that worked very well as well. So I think I've given you an idea of the challenges and what we think we might be able to do. Thank you. Gracias. Merci. Obrigada. Desculpa, Brazil, mas obrigada. Thanks very much.
Muchísimas gracias a usted, doctora Penrith, por esta excelente presentación.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I would like to tell you that we've had reports from other countries who have joined us, such as Chile, Haiti, Guadeloupe, El Salvador. So thank you very much to all of you who have joined us today. And of course, we would like to have you join us throughout the year in our following series of webinars. We will now go on to our last speaker of the day, and then we will have the Q&A session. We have several questions posted already. We will now have the Dominican Republic's experience by Engineer Freddy Ramon Fernandez Acosta. He has a licensing degree on arts and political sciences. He is always a master's, BA, and a master's degree in globalization and international business, and a PhD on organizational leadership. Engineer Freddy, from 2002 to 2004, was at the Cibao Catholic Technological University at the Dominican Republic. He was a professor at the Business Administration University, Administration 1 and 2, adult program on political ideas and introduction to BA. From 2015 to 2017, and from 2017 to 2018 has been a professor faculty at the Catholic Cibao Technological University, La Vega, Dominican Republic, and faculty member at the OAM Recinto Moca, and he is a political advisor of Carolina Mejia. We will then have Engineer Freddy's presentation. Please, you have the floor. Go ahead. Good afternoon to all of our colleagues who are participating in this very interesting conversation. As a country that has to face a crisis, of course, we face shock, but we have to be prepared for the most difficult scenarios, but no one is prepared as a country to face such a cruel reality. So we immediately started, and we were not at the level required regarding labs, testing results. We started following the United States results, but it was quite complicated to detect the disease, to be able to confine it. So it was an uphill process. Dominican Republic estimates talk about 210,000 mothers and around 1.3 to 1.7 million heads. And to compensate this with industry investment was a challenge. This was about $700, $800 million worth. Our president was quite clear from the beginning as to the fact that compensation, together with detection and eradication of the diseased population, sampling of the population to avoid social conflict, then compensation had to be a fact. So all of the culled pigs have been compensated for. Together with the private sector, we jointly established an agreement as to how compensation was going to be provided, around $122, because we have set an exchange rate of around 7,000. It's around $100 per pig. And this, of course, equals to $21 million, 1.1 million pesos in this period of time. So this has made the program more agile when there's detection of the symptoms and they call for a sampling. Will they then have access to compensation and eradication? At the beginning, there were some doubts as to whether compensation was going to be paid. Now we have 3,964 producers and farmers who have eradicated around 147,000 pigs. And a compensation was offered to 94.7%, and 5.36 are pending compensation, because it's always before the end of the month that compensation takes place. This money has been derived from the national budget, from the Ministry of Agriculture budget, and this is the procedure we follow. First, we have an estimate of an appraisal of the deceased population. There's an invoice, someone from the Agricultural Bank signs, also a representative of the Animal Health Ministry and Husbandry Ministry also has to sign, and also a representative from the Ministry of Agriculture, which is the leading entity. With these three signatures, the invoice is issued, is sent to the Agricultural Bank, and the bank proceeds to deposit compensation directly to the producer. If there's a debt for that, there's a discounted value for this, and the check is handed directly to the producer. If there's no debt, then 100% is paid. This has been a successful program, quite swift, effective, and producers and farmers then willfully detect the symptoms. They call for a sampling. We do preventive sampling 7 days of the week, but compensation has been extremely successful. This has brought about trust, confidence, satisfaction, and after compensation, we have a plan for substitution of pig production by other species such as chickens, caprine, bovine, and it's a different type of compensation. It's broader then because it's not from the funds that they were paid, but with $2 million that the government has made available for a specific program in the hands of an NGO, which is the Dominican Agro-Business Board, who is also performing quite successfully. So this has been a gratifying, satisfying, and very fruitful experience. Our producers and farmers have accepted this, and our government has responded swiftly. So our economic crisis with ASF, which could have brought about severe consequences, well, this was avoided, and the agricultural sector is still ongoing. We have sacrificed or called 12%, and we have a long way to go. But with BIRCA's support, with the support from the FAO and the United States, this compensation mechanism will be faster, and we think we will have additional funds, more transparency for payments to make it more automatic and managed by a specific agency so that the ministry can continue with their tasks and have an elite team just for the management of ASF and compensation in collaboration with NGOs from civil society. So to summarize, this has been our Dominican Republic's experience. In a nutshell, this is our experience. In the past, we had eradication of the entire population, but there was no compensation for farmers. This is something that it is sadly remembered by farmers and producers because they lost everything they had. And of course, this made them lose trust. And of course, it was difficult at the beginning of this crisis because of this fact, and compensation was at stake. But thanks to this new process, we have their trust, and we have no issues in trying to detect, eradicate, and compensate producers and farmers that with so much effort, with their lifelong projects, to have to do away with their production. So we are here for your questions, and this is in a nutshell our humble experience with ASF and compensation in Dominican Republic.
Muchísimas gracias, ingeniero Freddy. La
Thank you
verdad es
very
que
much, Engineer Freddy. This is very valuable information for Latin America and the Caribbean countries. And now we will go on to the Q&A session.
We have a good number of questions, and so we are going to start with the Q&A.
me imagino que es para el doctor Higuera.
This is, I guess, for Dr. Iguera. Good morning. This is being asked by Juan Pablo Garrido Herrera. It's a question asked in the YouTube channel and says the prevention measures in Europe have been able to contain the cases of ASF. I would like to know if you have an idea of the time it takes for highly producing countries to get infected. I would like to know if the measures adopted in Europe and the islands of the Caribbean will be useful for us to test the vaccine. Well, I share the question, and in terms of if we will have enough time, because that's the key. Well, first, let's talk about Europe. In Europe, we already have 10 countries that are positive of ASF since 2014, compared to the spreading in China that described by Dr. Johnson. It is clear that the spreading in Europe has moved much lower, and also linked to the wild boar, not as much to domestic pigs, which is, in our case, our main problem. We see that the domestic pigs and farms are not being a transmission vector, but the boar is, the wild boar is. And so it's leading to more positive countries. We see that the disease is moving about 10, 20 kilometers a month. And we have had 3 important leaps in the Czech Republic and Belgium, where they were eradicated. And then we had a 3rd leap to Italy 3 months ago. So taking out those leaps, for the most part, the disease is moving slowly, but constantly. It's not a kind of explosive disease. And today, this morning, here in Spain, because it's already afternoon here, I met with Dr. Sanchez Vizcaíno, that many of you probably have heard about, who is developing a very interesting project on a living specific vaccine with EU funds. And hopefully we will have this vaccine developed by 2024, and maybe 2025, according to what they said, they may be actually selling it. So that's one way. And I also say that today's situation in Europe, the vaccine will only be used in the wild boar, the wild pig, because we don't see the disease in domestic pigs. So that would be the best tool we would have to prevent the spreading of the disease in the wild boar population. But this disease is a very complicated disease to be eradicated. Thank you very much, Dr. Iguera. Now we are going to continue with a question for Dr. Wayne Johnson. Maria Appel is asking, where did you get that 50% that you mentioned, 50% in China, from agricultural funds?
You mean 50% of the pigs being produced? Well, which 50% do you mean? Do you mean the 50% of the pigs in the world are produced in China? I think that's about correct, roughly that. And it's often summarized that due to ASF in the initial round, in the first round, about half of the pigs in China died. It means that about a quarter of the pigs in the world were, disappeared. There's various guesses at it, from 35% to 60%, but the something about half of the pigs in China were lost during the first round of ASF. Presently, about 30% of the pigs that go to market in China are ASF positive, and so this is a result of tooth pulling or chronic pigs. I don't know if that. Hope that got your question.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. We have another question by Jaime Romero. This question is for you as well.
Oh,
Was the compensation? Were you going to say something, Doctor?
well, I was waiting to hear the question for sure. I was reading on the chat box, and sorry.
Ok,
Maybe
entonces,
maybe the
de
question.
parte
About the who pays for it. And so there was information released. There were news bulletins released by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Communities that said that 50% of the cost would be borne by the local government and 50% by the national government. This actually came out, but most of the time there isn't any communication about the disease on the farm. There's no communication with anyone. They take care of it themselves because they don't want to get entangled.
Ok, la siguiente pregunta, Dr.
Okay,
Johnson.
so the next question, Dr. Johnson. Will compensation be good to compensate for excessive prices in China?
Well, the excessive, I didn't bring any information about the price curves, and that could be a whole nother topic. But after the pigs, after there was that the market is subject to the pig cycle. If you have a tremendous decrease in supply and demand is still there, then the price of pigs soared to exorbitant prices. At one point, the price of pigs in China was 9 times the U.S. price, but then they opened the import window, and they allowed imports to come in from everywhere, Brazil, from Spain, from Europe, from everywhere, and even from Germany for a while. And then this crushed the local price of pork, and then there was a great drop in the pork price, and we are still in that aftermath. That along with recurring outbreaks and tooth pulling and the selling off of pigs, and there's still periodic fluctuations in the price, and also apparently some trading as well. The amount of pork that was imported was about 7.8 million metric tons, something on that order. We calculated that if you put it in 1 meter cubes, it would reach from St. Louis to Beijing.
Wow. Muchas gracias,
Wow.
Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. Even though the next question was already answered in the chat by Dr. Iguera, I'm still gonna say it out loud and read it out loud so that people who were not able to have access to the chat can actually hear it. The question is the service delayed to supervise? Well, if the service takes too long to get to the farm, and then they find that the pigs were already culled, will they still get compensation? Well, I apologize for answering the question in the chat, but I can gladly answer it verbally as well. Well, if the suspicion report can be done on the dead animal. Sometimes we don't have the suspicion until the necropsy is done. So maybe they can arrive once there's mortality in the farm. That's not a problem. The problem is for them to be able to do the report of suspicion and for them to do the raise the hand, raise the voice of alert. The more suspicions we raise, the better, because it's a lot easier to have 100 false positives than to have one false negative. So it's best to over-report. So if we see a necropsy, and obviously in the current situation where we have ASF and we see lesions that are compatible with ASF, well, definitely we need to call the competent authority, and then the competent authority might actually find 3% or 5 or 8% that rate in the farm. That's not a problem. The farm is mobilized, all the animals are culled, and then we certify for all animals. Okay, thank you very much. And here's another question by Jaime Romero, which is the effect of the compensation in market prices, and how can the compensation system generate mobilization of animals? If you don't have a good animal identification traceability program, compensation may be a system that might help spread the disease. Yes, as we mentioned in the chat, yes, that's a risk, compensation. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we wanted to be completely transparent on what was going on in Spain before launching the eradication system, because maybe they would be more interested in having the disease than not having it, because they would make more money by having it than by not having it. So that's why we try to avoid that. What we need to do is to compensate the losses, but not produce a benefit to the farmer. Benefits should not be based on the culling of the animals. And the other important thing is what was mentioned before as well. We have a control and eradication campaign for ASF. We need to focus first on trying to identify 100% of the animals in the places. So if we don't have that picture that is clear to base ourselves upon for the rest, then things might not work. And the compensation payment should be as fair as possible, but not go beyond that, because if you go beyond that, you may actually be moving the disease unintentionally, because if you might make more money by declaring the ASF than by sending the animals to the slaughterhouse, and that shouldn't be happening. Yes, thank you very much. Now, the next question is for Dr. Johnson. This is a question by Claire, Coin the Pass. How effective is the reporting system for depot and repo? Are there certain scenarios that may be privileged over depopulation?
Well, you've got the facilities, and you've got the people who are trained, and you've got the system for producing pigs. If somebody, and in China, the land that and the facilities for producing pigs and the permission to raise pigs is also very valuable, because you can't just raise them anywhere, and there's not all that many places available that you could use that have utilities, that have water, and have electricity, that have things that you need for modern production. So they want to get back into business, and so depop and repop can be very traumatic. But maybe there are ways to get it done with breeding the gilts off site, and various things can be done to get back into business fairly quickly if you've got facilities that are able to be cleaned. If you've got concrete and steel and not a lot of dirt and not a lot of wood, you can get the place cleaned back up. We've used sentinel pigs to see if things were clean, and it seems that we were able to get it cleaned up. The people are able to motivated to get it cleaned up. Once they've had an outbreak, they'll get it cleaned up, and you can get back in and get back in business fairly quickly. The virus is destroyed by cleaning and disinfection, so it's kind of logic. It's not mystery. I hope that got the question. You can ask again if I didn't get it.
Muchísimas gracias, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. We have another question for you by Chris Ora. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Johnson. You said that in a vaccination law against ASF, a lot is being transported outside China. Do you have any information on what type of vaccinations are being used, where they were manufactured or produced, and what is efficacy once used in the field?
Well, some of the information we have that is not strong enough, not solid enough to be shared, I suppose. There's a lot of rumors, and there's a lot of things that you can figure out. But the most common vaccine was a double gene deleted vaccine, that it had a deletion in CD2V and in MGF 505, I believe. I may get those numbers not just right, but they had two gene deletions, and this virus was unable to kill the pig outright, but the pig was also unable to overcome it. That the pig is not able to, too many pigs are not able to eliminate this virus, the vaccine virus, from their body, and it continues to damage the endothelial lining of the blood vessels, and so you get a lot of reproductive problems and chronic respiratory disease, and several weeks or even months after vaccinations, sows would die, but there was a lot of infertility in the meantime. If the virus was indeed virulent, it would be transmitted across the placenta, and so the people that had gone through and had vaccinated sows, there would be a viral infertility syndrome in the sows, and they would abort, and with fairly typical lesions in the blood vessels, a lot of thrombosis and infarction in the blood vessels. Some ways looks like classical swine fever, but it's unique enough that we can diagnose African swine fever by looking at the lymph nodes and some of the other organs under the microscope. We know what it looks like. It does some very interesting things to the blood vessels, just like it does to the gut of the tick. It thinks it's still inside the tick, and it gets into the endothelial cells of the blood vessels. Finally, the herds that had vaccinated all their sows, they had repopulated and decided to vaccinate all the gilts. They ended up depopulating those herds because gilts would finally die from chronic respiratory disease. They'd have some of them would have a golf ball, tennis ball, softball size infarcts in fibrin plugs in their lungs, and a lot of people thought it was APP. They thought it was Actinobacillus pleuropneumonia, but it was the vaccine virus. We were able to get the vaccine virus out of these lesions, and they call it the double gene deleted vaccine. And one guy in Guangdong, very humorous guy, he said that there were two things that were deleted. One was the ethics of the people that sold the vaccine, and the other one was the brain power of the people that bought it. That's why they called it double deleted. Well, it's kind of humorous, but it wasn't funny at all. And then that virus is still out there, and most of the cases we see are still the field virus, but we have seen a great deal of the vaccine virus. It is said that the type 1 virus was brought in. Someone from the U.S. said it was from Portugal. We don't know. We haven't seen that. Everything we've seen has been type 2, and the type 2 variant, the vaccine variants. Some people have said that these are natural variants. We haven't seen any natural variants. We've just seen the vaccine virus and the field virus.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson.
Que no se puede compartir
This is an effort because you don't have full information on all of the vaccines. This is just for us to share experiences and know-how. This question was answered by Dr. Iguera. I will repeat it. By Jaime Romero is the question. The second answer is quite clear. Compensation has to be a part of the eradication system. If not, it's just social aid. However, this is long and difficult to pay. So is there a reduction in price adjustments so that after compensation and repopulation, we have new outbreaks in the farm? So this will be proof that biosecurity failed, or was it just by chance? Yes, it is possible. It may happen within an eradication system. Yes, there could be reinfection. However, nonetheless, reinfection takes place, payment will be the same. There is no penalty for reinfection. As was said, it's enough with the loss of production because of infection. So if we apply repopulation to a farm that has virus presence, and we do investment in a CF1 for genetics, and we cannot get reimbursement because we need to sacrifice or call them, then of course this would lead to a vast economic loss from the production viewpoint, even if we compare to an operational farm, even if we haven't yet recomposed assets. So penalty is a penalty by the market for reinfection, but payment goes for reinfection is exactly the same as if it was just the first infection. Excellent, thank you very much. We have a general question. It's not addressed to anyone. The federal law for animal health in Mexico contemplates penalties for veterinarians that are not reporting disease that could be considered exotic. Within compensation systems presented by the speakers, is there a country or region that establishes or sets penalties for under-reporting or non-reporting? And if so, which? It's an open question. Well, I can start. In Spain, we do have some. We have Animal Health Act that is like a higher level within the legal standing in Spain. It's even above a decreed order or an executive order that mandates in case of suspicion, they are obliged. It's mandatory that they have to report suspicion. And if not, this is a breach of the law, and they're liable to punishment. So in order to get compensation, first they need to report your suspicion in order to avoid under-reporting or making the mistake of not reporting a positive case. So it is as described. If you know or you have a suspicion of a disease, then you need to report. If not, you're going against the law. Thank you, Dr. Iguera. Other comments or answers to this question by other panelists?
Yeah, could I say something? Yeah, I can only really, on that subject, I can really only speak for South Africa because I don't know whether other countries have it or not. I don't think so. In our animal disease legislation, there is legislation that compels both owners of animals and, of course, veterinarians to report disease when it's suspected. I think that if a state veterinarian failed to report the disease and it was discovered, he'd probably be fired. Doesn't say that in the legislation, but I think it would happen. But as far as farmers reporting disease, to my knowledge, that law is not enforced at all. That's all I can say. We have a ton of legislation in South Africa. Every time something happens, there's a new law, but you probably know from the publicity we get that South Africa is probably one of the most lawless countries in the world. It's a national occupation, breaking the law. We all do it all the time. So I would say that there's nothing effective in place for punishment. There is one thing that if a commercial farm, it has happened, if a commercial farm gets infected with, say, classical swine fever or African swine fever, whether they report it or not, their pigs will be culled without compensation because they were supposed to have biosecurity in place. And the law says that you must have biosecurity. If you keep animals, you've got to keep their health safe. But at the same time, compensation was paid to people who allowed their pigs to roam freely in the Eastern Cape province because they were poor and they voted for the government, I guess. So there were discrepancies there that caused a lot of trouble and, in fact, court cases, which is one reason why I can't talk too much about compensation currently in South Africa. Anyway, thank you. But reporting, there is legislation and probably quite a few countries have it, unlike us, probably don't.
Muchas gracias, doctora Penrith. ¿Alguien más que quiera hablar sobre esto?
Thank you very much, doctor. Somebody else wishes to comment on this, or we go on to our next question? Well, we'll do so. Then our next question was answered by Dr. Iguera during the previous initial stage of productive or production conversion, that is to say, when you have backyard, I believe there's a chain of intermediaries, transportation, as it takes place in 90% of the cases. In Haiti, we have a high number of these, and Dominican Republic. So how do you fix prices and compensation? Or was this after reconversion only? In my viewpoint, this is a positive aspect. I wish to call it positive. You never know. Control and eradication of ASF has allowed us to have a registry, a follow-up, minimum requirements to all of the facilities. What happened in Spain? All of the backyards had to be registered and had to comply with the minimum operational requirements. So backyard started to lose sense because to have the pig in a backyard was more expensive than buying it from a farm. It didn't make much sense then. And this, of course, coincided with the rural exodus to the cities. So backyard production was reduced in Spain considerably. We have 86,000 registered farms, including backyard production. These amount to 25,000 facilities, and we have a maximum by law that you can have. I mean, the maximum capacity for backyard in Spain would be around 60,000 pigs. We have culled 56 million pigs in Spain. 0.001% of the meat comes from backyard pigs, or 99.98% of pig meat comes from registered farms. So from the cultural viewpoint, this has been reduced and it's almost over. So this is one of the most relevant outcomes of the ASF legislation, which was to make it more professional. So everything that has to do with backyard production was almost eliminated. And in Spain also, the growth of big scale producers has eliminated the intermediaries. They directly sell to the slaughterhouse. There are no traders in between, and the trader has almost disappeared. And as you know, the industry is vertically growing, so the companies have the production and the slaughterhouse all together. So this is doing away with traders, intermediaries, and looking for efficiency. So one same company has the complete chain, and this, of course, skips intermediaries and agencies, traders, and this, of course, reduces costs. Thank you very much for your full answer, Dr. Iguera. Then we have a comment by Joseph Corbill, Haiti delegate to the OIE. She says that this webinar was quite informative and the different compensation strategies are very useful, or although not all cases are applicable, but for industrial level and industrial scale countries, this is something that can be implemented, and that in Haiti, they will try to follow these examples, and that's what they hope for. We also have a question for Dr. Freddy Fernandez from Andrea Zapata. The bank discounts the debts independently from the fact whether the debt had to do with pig production. And if so, wouldn't this reduce reports for fear of the bank discounting their already established debts? This is something that we assessed at the beginning of the outbreak, but the debt only discounts if the debt is related strictly to pig production. If the debt has a different relation or is related to a different type of production, then it is not discounted, because if not, it wouldn't make much sense, and producers would be afraid of reporting for fear of losing this compensation. Thank you very much. Our next question is for Dr. Penrith. I understand that the best design for compensation applies for the technified or more developed farms. Do you have some tips to face such a complexity in production systems of backyard, for example, where we do not have a system to identify the animals, but we do have traceability? Go ahead. We have one more question for you, but we will start with it.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I probably wasn't very clear about what sort of pigs were being compensated for exactly. In most of Africa, there's not very much traceability. We have, for instance, a requirement for all pigs over 4 months old to be ear tattooed and put into the system, but that doesn't really, it's not done with the backyard farms and the informal settlements and the village pigs all over Africa. They're not normally identified. And basically what happens for them, yes, the compensation schemes, some of them were applied across the board, others, because for instance in Ghana, as I showed, there were villages that were compensated per kilogram for the pigs. But what we have done, again in South Africa, is that where we've had outbreaks in we call them informal settlements. They're basically slums that are set up by migrant populations that come from all over Africa, but from some of our poorer provinces to our richer provinces as well. And a lot of the people keep a few pigs because they need them to keep going. And we only know about the outbreak because somebody says the pigs are dying over there. So you go and have a look, and you don't then need traceability exactly because you know which the pigs are. And what our pork producer organization did was to offer the people goodwill payments for sick pigs that needed to be killed. And they weren't market related exactly, but you're not going to get anything for a sick pig anyway. Well, you might in some countries, but you probably wouldn't with us. Someone might steal it to eat it, but you wouldn't sell it to them. They wouldn't buy it. And so they took these goodwill payments, and where there were some pigs that were really at risk, that were roaming around, scavenging on garbage, the pork producer organization actually bought those pigs, killed them, and had the carcasses rendered because they didn't, want to take the chance, and the people were happy enough with that. Most of the pigs that are in backyards and villages in Africa are quite low value. When we wrote a review of the epidemic in West Africa, one of the reviewers was absolutely certain that we'd made a dreadful mistake because it was said that in Benin, the average price paid for compensation was $5 for a pig. And that was actually very generous because they're tiny little pigs and they slaughter out at about 28 kilograms. So it wasn't a bad price, really. So no, sorry, it wasn't $50, it was $5. We didn't leave an ought off. So that is really why we're thinking about why these incentives to firstly minimize the number of pigs killed, but also incentives to really encourage prevention in those level farm sectors are extremely important. And that's something that I'm very much involved in through FAO, a group of experts and so on, thinking about how do we get better biosecurity for these smallholder pigs so that the less compensation we have to worry about, the better. I really don't know if that answers your question, but that's basically the situation.
Muchísimas gracias, doctora Penrith. Y la otra pregunta.
Thank you so much, doctor. We have another question. Could we have higher compensations if, we have a big chain of suppliers? Can we restrict the movement of the animals and the disease if we reduce intermediaries?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last words there. Can we reduce? Could you repeat that, please? Sorry.
Claro que sí. Los precios de compensación podrían ser más
compensation prices could be higher under or considering the big intermediary chain we have, and then increase the number of animals transported and the disease because of this?
Yes, I think so. But our biggest problem is where any money is going to come from for compensation in Africa, because very few of the countries have got a specific fund for that. And because most of them are not really producing animals for export or for high value markets. So where you do have high value market targets like our country, for example, we have a very small but lucrative ostrich industry, which is all for export practically. And they got avian influenza, and the compensation there was frightening because the value of the ostriches is absolutely frightening. And that kind of ate up all the money for any other species. But with, yeah, I think the bigger your industry is, the more you're able to justify compensation, and perhaps you could, raise the compensation that's paid. But in fact, all our successful, really successful, large-scale compensation efforts have been done with money from outside the country. with donors. And we can't go on depending on that forever because it's getting less and less available. I don't really know if that answered the question because I don't know if I really caught it properly, but I hope it helped.
Muchísimas gracias. Así es.
Yes, thank you very much. And now we are almost done with our questions. We have one question from Dr. Romero. Dr. Freddy, thank you so much for your presentation. Congratulations to the Dominican Republic for the energy with which you have faced this complex situation. After compensation systems in place, and if you look at other experiences shared, what topics do you think would be interesting to apply in your case in the Dominican Republic?
En cuanto a la pregunta de si podemos hacia dónde.
Regarding the question of if we can move forward based on what has been said here and what things can be improved, well, I didn't mention that in my presentation, but just like in the case of Spain, at the end of the compensation plan, we adopted a number of measures. For example, the organized farms are visited in order to establish the biosanitary levels. And we also established some clear indicators of the farms that are working in trying to prevent the disease from entering. And those who do not comply with it will not be compensated, and that's the risk. And that led to some positive results because then the biosecurity measures were increased because producers understood that if they did not implement them, they would risk getting a compensation. And so that was the word spread about that. And I think that we can improve the fact that people cannot do whatever they want, especially with backyard pigs, because that would be a never-ending story if their biosecurity measures are not enhanced. And so I believe we need to establish a number of parameters, just like the ones established by Spain for producers, so that they understand that regardless what they, so that they don't think that regardless of what they do, they will still be compensated. Thank you very much, Engineer Fernandez. We have a few more questions. This is for Dr. Penrith by Andrea Zapata. How important is pig production in Africa's economy? What would be the census? Can you please clarify if ASF is endemic in your continent? Thank you.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, African swine fever is endemic in Eastern and Southern Africa, and it's going to be endemic there forever now in the Sylvatic cycle with the warthogs. We're not about to kill our warthogs. We make a great deal more out of tourism to see our wild animals than we do out of pig production. So we just have to live with that, and it is endemic in most of the continent, in any countries that keep pigs. So the value of pig production, it's very difficult in a way for people to understand what it is. But I'm glad to have the opportunity to say this because we've heard a lot about backyard pig farming and what a nuisance they are. But I don't think in any of our countries, the commercial sector, pig sector, contributes an enormous amount to our national income, even those of us who export, and we export a lot to the region. It doesn't compete with beef, it doesn't compete. It's a ruminant continent, Africa. Ruminants have a much higher value, and poultry does pretty well too. But pigs have an enormous socio-economic value in our very large smallholder backyard traditional subsistence farming sector. These people absolutely depend on their pigs to make the difference between whether they can pay the child's school fees, whether they can buy a pair of shoes for the child to go to school. And it's a dreadful disgrace in most countries, not mine, but in most countries, for a child to go to school barefooted. So, and it also pays for some of the health things that they need. And beyond that, they have cultural and traditional and ceremonial values in some countries. So that, for instance, you can't really have a good funeral without pigs. You can't really have a good wedding without pigs. You can't really celebrate a child coming into the world without pigs. That's not really the case in South Africa. We don't have many pig cultures, but in West Africa, for instance, it's extremely important, and in parts of East Africa as well. And if the pigs are lost, the people lose social status because your livestock gives you status. They lose the possibility to sell a pig if you really need funding. And they don't always lose the possibility to start again, because it's so important in those cultures that when their pigs die, somebody's going to bring them some more pigs and say, look here, we've got an extra piglet, you can get started again. But it has got huge socioeconomic importance, which is why we don't want to say, against the law, you can't do it, because that wouldn't be right. And the other thing is with culling, sometimes these pigs are very close, the families got very close to the sow. We saw it in Cape Verde, where the sow sits on the veranda with Granny. Granny's peeling potatoes, she's dropping the peels for the sow. The sow's looking up at Granny, waiting for the peels. And when we tried to even take a blood sample from those pigs, they used to say, oh yes, of course, that's fine. I'll give it some food and get it a bit closer. And then as we approached the needle, they'd say, and the pig would run off, because they didn't want us sticking needles into their pigs. They felt too sorry for them. So it's a whole important thing that can't be measured financially. But as far as contribution to Africa's income, well, no, it was 5% of the world's pigs, and a lot more sheep. Sheep are much more important.
Disculpe, no, es que se está metiendo el canal en portugués al de español, nada más.
I apologize. We can hear Spanish and Portuguese in the same channel. Do you have anything else to say? Dr. Penrith, do you have any, Penrith?
No, not at all.
Sorry, Dr. Penrith, anything else to say? Sorry.
Gracias.
No, I talk much too much. Thank you.
Más bien hablé mucho, disculpen.
Muchísimas gracias. No, para nada, para nada.
No, not at all. Your answer was quite interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that information with us. And yes, this was just to clarify that we were getting the channels mixed. So we have one more question and one more comment. The question is for Dr. Iguera by Milton Moraes. It says, in your presentation, you mentioned briefly the private funds for the compensation of farmers. In Brazil, during the outbreaks, the compensation distributed between the state governments, the federal governments, as well as private funds. What do you think about that? Well, not in Spain. We don't have any private funds. Compensation, like I said, compensation depends on mandatory reporting. And like I said before, we try to do this through risk insurance. But again, the reinsurance and the market values and the value markets and the stock markets and things has not allowed us to insure this in the stock market. So the only thing that we have now for the slaughtering of animals is through the government. In the EU, we have 50% is paid from the European Veterinary Fund, and the other 50% comes from the member state. And then there's another percentage that we have to pay, that is 50% by the government at the state, and the other 50% is the autonomous region. So from all of the money that the farmer receives, 50% comes from Europe, 25% by the state government, and 25% by the regional government. And sadly enough, we don't have any private initiatives that may actually compensate to losses due to ASF. It's not bad. I don't think it's a bad idea, because oftentimes this is done because of a culling of animals. And I think that sometimes we fall short because we need to compensate for the downtime and also the losses in the drop of the market value. And currently that is not being compensated by the biosanitary risk. So I think that's very serious and much more serious than just culling animals. Well, thank you very much for your answer, Dr. Iguera. And we have a comment by Dr. Mark Trotman. I have heard about a proposal to compensate farmers whose herds were culled by offering replacing their sows with or pigs with different animals like poultry or other animals to reduce the risk for reinfection. Is this a viable alternative? Is it open for, and this is an open question. Go ahead, Dr. Penrith.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I actually had some experience of that in Mauritius, where that was immediately offered, because a great many of the government people are not pro-pigs at all. It's in fact the Creole population there who come from Africa who keep pigs by and large. And they were offered the opportunity to start a chicken farm instead of the pig farm. And they, not one took it. They just said, but we're pig farmers. We're not chicken farmers. No way, sorry, but we're going to go on farming pigs. So I think it can work perhaps in some conditions. And perhaps if you were very strict and said, well, it's chickens or nothing, you can, go for it. But on the other hand, some people in Côte d'Ivoire, where the agency that was going, the French agency that was going to assist with the restocking, for some reason best known to themselves, demanded a 3-year standstill before they would restock. Well, you can imagine a farm can't stand still for 3 years and the family keep living alive. So some of the farmers bought pigs and started again. The northern part of the country wasn't infected, they could get pigs. And others did start with poultry because they said, okay, well, pigs are really discouraging. They get this awful disease and let's not. But I think it's something that's quite difficult to impose. It's something that possibly you can offer them the choice, but a great many of them are going to say, no, thank you.
Yeah, we know of operations that put in ducks after they had lost the sows and lost the pigs from ASF, that they put ducks back in, and there were, ducks are fairly adaptable, and they put them in the nurseries where they had weaned pigs, and in the farrowing crates where they had sows, they put ducks, and the ducks were able to survive in there and grow. And I think that maybe they went back to pigs after a while, because then pigs started to make a lot of money. So, but they did put in ducks for a while.
Adelante, muchas gracias.
Sí.
Adelante, Dr.
Thank you
Higuera.
very much, Dr. Johnson. Go ahead, Dr. Iguera. Yes, I share the thoughts of my colleagues that from the sanitary standpoint is not a bad measure, because that helps prevent the spreading of the disease. But from the practical standpoint, is not feasible, as Dr. Johnson mentioned it. It's more as an anecdote, right? It's a kind of funny story, because whoever is a pig farmer wants to produce pigs, and they like pigs, and they want to continue growing. And the other thing has to do with the facilities. If we specialize in having pigs, and it's because we are pig farmers. It's not like we can just adapt those facilities for chicks overnight. So the idea is not to have a long time, downtime time, like 6 months or a year, to then just change the species to help the spreading of the disease, to stop the spreading of the disease. But again, the pig farmer wants to be a pig farmer, not any other animal farmer, usually. Yes, I agree with you completely. Thank you very much for your answers, for your truly valuable presentations. This has been a very interesting webinar and a very useful webinar for many people who attended from different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are being asked if we're going to get any direct technical support to establish a compensation system in countries. Well, all these topics are being coordinated via the different agencies, GFTATS, OIE, IICA, FAO, CVP, and all the different agencies that we mentioned before. And in due time, countries may actually ask for it, and we will try to respond. Will the presentations be available? Yes, of course. And just want to let you know that this webinar was recorded, and so you can watch it in the social media in all 4 languages, in Spanish, English, French, and Portuguese, and that's available to all. And before closing today's webinar, I would just like to make a quick announcement, because for Dr. Wayne Johnson, it is very late right now. And the next webinar will be held on March 22nd. And it will deal in the handling of emergencies in African swine fever in general, whenever an outbreak is announced or there's suspicion of an outbreak. So we will continue dealing with all these very important topics for this continent and for the world. I would like to reiterate my gratitude to our panelists for their wonderful presentations, for sharing their experiences and knowledge with us. We will knock your doors again at some point, probably. And just want to thank those who joined us today from all different countries and the different agencies. As well, I would like to thank our interagency group, which makes this webinar possible, as they all coordinate together. As I said before, we have many agencies: IICA, OIE, FAO, CVP, CaribVET, CAFSA, COPEG, OIRSA. Well, again, we have USDA as well. We have many agencies that are collaborating here, and we are all working together to bring the best information to all countries. So thank you all. Greetings to all. And we hope, and we're looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you all. Good night or good day.
Thank you.
I want to praise the translators. They did a great job.
Yeah,
Thank you very much,
really.
sir.
Muy cierto. Y todo el equipo.
So true. And the entire team who's collaborating as well. Thank you.